Good evening, I'm the Friendly Senpai, and today we are going to be talking about The Last Birdling, an adventure visual novel created by Invert Mouse and published to Steam today. It tells the story of Bimonia and Tayo, two young girls who meet by chance when Tayo is foraging for food in the wilderness. While Tayo is just a normal human with a penchant for archery, Bimonia and her mother are the last of the legendary Birdlings, a carnivorous, human-esque species with bird-like characteristics. Because humans and birdlings are sworn enemies, the friendship that they forge is more than a little unconventional, and the decisions you make throughout their journey will dictate if they can overcome the xenophobia that threatens to tear them apart. So, I'm a little conflicted on how I feel about The Last Birdling's writing. On one hand, the story is fantastic. I love Invert Mouse's penchant for world building because if you let him, he can create an amazing universe with a rich and unique lore to boot. So the setting for The Last Birdling was a beautiful one, and it made for a wonderful premise for a story about love and friendship that two girls share. The problem here is how the lore was presented to the player. Throughout the game, there will be several moments where the option to access the glossary will appear, and the glossary will cover government practices, birdling traits, the previous war between humans and birdlings, and so on. Glossaries, in general, are a great idea, especially with a game that has a very complex lore, or a game like SC2VN that uses a lot of gaming lingo. But The Last Birdling relies very heavily on the glossary, so much so that you won't know about the game's universe if you don't read it. I honestly would have much preferred if the narrative inserted more of this information into the dialogue and the character's thought processes, rather than relying on the character to read through paragraphs of glossary entries. Also, the glossary spoils a pretty major part of the second half of the game, so... Alright, so outside of that, I do want to talk about the narrative style, because I really liked it, but I also have a bone to pick with it. As you play The Last Birdling, the story flip-flops between BB's and Yo-Yo's perspectives. As it does this, you will notice that the narrative will shift depending on whose eyes you're looking out of. The writing for Bimonia's thought processes is very rough and childish, and it uses a very simple and basic vocabulary. Meanwhile, Tayo's has a very mature and educated flow to it. The best example of this for me was when the characters are looking at gore. Bimonia will usually just call it blood and guts and will focus on just how there's blood spewing everywhere. But Tayo will go into detail about how a human or an animal was disemboweled. At first, I thought it was just inconsistent writing and it bugged the hell out of me. But once I figured out what was going on, I really began to appreciate the effort that went into building both of their personalities. The bone I have to pick with it is just the writing quality wasn't the best. The writing quality was kind of clunky, and it had a number of careless errors scattered throughout. And really, the issues I have with the quality of writing would have easily been rectified if Infant Mouse had just hired an editor that could polish up his writing a bit. And it was really expositional. Bimonia and Tayo are very aware of the skills they inherited from their mothers, so much so that they bring it up relatively frequently. Tayo's mother is allegedly the best archer in the village, and Tayo's skill level matches hers even at a young age. But we don't see that in the story. And the same goes for Bimonia. We hear about how superior a birdling's strength is, but it's really only when it's mentioned by the characters' narratives. We don't actually get to see their skills in action. Well, except for maybe Bimonia at like the very end. But this all just kind of ties into me wishing that the game's lore and the character stories were more fleshed out rather than being handed to you in information dumps. That said, I do want to give you guys a heads up on just how fucking dark this game gets. I was expecting something that was all sunshine and rainbows and Disney princesses. And it's not, at all. The Last Birdling has surprisingly dark content. As I mentioned earlier, there is a fair amount of gore where people are getting torn apart and decapitated, and they're just getting bloodied up a lot. But there's also rape and a score of mental illnesses, and characters being unfairly ostracized from society, mentions of cannibalism, and a couple of other scenes that just kind of made my jaw drop a bit. Now, it's worth noting that I love shit like this. Dark stories with taboo subjects scratch a deep-seated itch I have had since childhood. But because this was entirely unexpected, I feel like it would be irresponsible of me to not mention it. Especially with that rape scene. That I feel like I complained a lot about the writing, but in reality, I did very much enjoy it. Especially once shit started to hit the fan. Like, once things stopped being, you know, this light and airy story about two young girls forging an unlikely friendship, once things, like, got really dark, it's my shit. The last Birdling had a really pretty art style that really brought this story to life. There's so much I want to talk about, but I first want to commend the character artist Aya, oh god, for the outstanding character designs we are presented with. Not only were each and every one of these characters created with a vibrancy that truly embodied the friendship theme of the game, but it was done so in a way that made them feel entirely unique to the last Birdling. At no point will I ever expect to find a character that looks like Bibi or Tayo, and if you were to put them in a collage of random characters, I would absolutely be able to individually pick them out and remember what game they're from. Moreover, there was a subtle attention to detail that kind of blew my mind, because looking at the characters in the last Birdling, they look very simple. Not in a bad way, I'm not saying that they're plain, but it's in the sense where there aren't any unnecessary details. But when you really take the time to look at them, there are actually a lot of details just sitting around waiting to be found. There's an organic, natural flow to the way the animal hide creases and folds in Bimonia's and her mother's clothing, and you can see that it has the same kind of visual pattern and textures that you would see in real life. Additionally, the markings on Bibi's arms look like they were made with some kind of paint, and the fur lining and V's cape looks fluffy and realistic. Of course, I could keep going on pointing out all the different details in everyone's hair and their eyes and their outfits, but nobody's got time for that. Not all of my opinions on the character art are positive, though, because I don't understand. God, this drove me crazy. I don't understand why there are wings coming out of the birdlings' necks, especially right at the base of the skull. That's just a weird placement, and I hated it. I did actually really love the angles that the character artists used, though, because they really enhanced every scene's moods. This is primarily praise for the CGs featured in the second half of the game, which is when the tone shifted into something very dark and heavy. But the artists took their time to create CGs at generally difficult angles to draw, which I appreciated so much. And I do want to point out that, again, Invert Mouse has presented us with some light animation. It's mostly just Spimonia's ears fluttering when she's excited or angry, or the layers shifting in a CG, but it's the fact that they took the extra step to enhance the visual quality of his visual novel accounts. I also really dug the way that some of the backgrounds would set using ATL, with the different mountain layers falling into place one after the other. Now, regarding the backgrounds, Invert Mouse's background artist, Julia Storyboard, did a good job of creating the last Birdling world. I won't say there's anything terribly exceptional or unique about the overall designs because they're pretty plain, but it gets the job done. So, TLDR, I actually really enjoyed The Last Birdling. I know it sounded like I complained a little bit because, I mean, it does start out a little slow and maybe the writing wasn't the best, but the story was compelling and I really love the characters for what they were. And the artists did such a bombastic job of bringing the story to life and enhancing every scene. I also really wanted to point out that the soundtrack for The Last Birdling was fantastic. The Last Birdling has the same composer as Cursed Sight, F.A. Tozan, who uses an array of East Asian and Western instruments to bring everything together and just tie it up with a big red bow. Anyways, those are my thoughts on The Last Birdling. If you're interested in playing it, I will have a link to it in the description below where you can buy it on Steam for $8.99. If you're watching this after the first week, if you watch it within the first week of the launch, it is actually on sale. I think it has like a 25% discount. Otherwise, as always, you can find all of my social media as well as my Patreon in the description. Happy unbirthday, and remember that Senpai loves you. Bye!